Come along, children. Now we're going to have a little music.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to First Cut. This is our review of the half of it, a new Netflix movie that's kind of been sweeping the social media atmosphere, sweeping the nation. People are watching this movie. It's a fun coming-of-age story directed by Alice Wu. I'm excited to talk about it because I feel like it has a lot of success. And I want to go straight to you, Sabrina. Just give me your general thoughts on this movie.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool, as you said, coming of age story. And I feel like it kind of goes in a lot of different directions. It's kind of like, it's not so formulaic as we've seen from a lot of coming of age stories. Our main character is kind of this cool person that we really get to love throughout watching the film. And it's based off of like her relationships, like her relationship with her friend Paul, and then kind of her relationship with herself and her relationship with her identity and her sexuality. Because, you know, when you're a teenager, you're kind of going through all of those motions and kind of like, who am I? What is it that I want? You know, with like things like college, life. But then this is another little wrench that's thrown in. So yeah, I really like the dynamic between her and her friend, and then her and Aster Flores. I think Alice Wu did a really, really great job of kind of balancing all of that and telling the story in a really sweet and wholesome way, and something that a lot of people can enjoy, whether or not you're a female and you've ever been through this. I feel like this is kind of a universal story. We've all been through something similar to what she's going through.
Yeah, I mean, before I get to you, RB3, this is slightly based on Alice Wu's real life coming of age when she had this relationship with this guy who was her best friend, and also balancing her relationship with other girls. The way she describes it, she says that she would hang out with her guy friend and talk about girls, which is kind of fun. But that's slightly based on that. And it's funny because obviously we've seen love triangles before in movies, but this was definitely a different type of love triangle for obvious reasons, as you can see in the film. I don't know if I've ever seen a love triangle dynamic quite like this. That's something that I really thought was interesting and a big takeaway for me. RB3, what are your thoughts on this film?
Yeah, I mean, you know, around this point, around every year, maybe not at this exact point, but there's usually once a year we get that like standout coming of age story that that's kind of remembered for, you know, for a long time. And in 2016, it was like The Edge of 17. 2017, I think it was Lady Bird. 2018, eighth grade, I'd argue was that too. And then 2019 was Booksmart. I think the half of it kind of fits perfectly into like that kind of genre of like coming of age, the modern day, like coming of age stories that really invoke like the 80s, like, you know, all of those coming of age, you know, from who's Hughes? John Hughes, exactly. Yeah. It feels very John Hughes-esque from, you know, what is from his subject matter to his female lead to the like you said, like the hint of romance, but really more about self-discovery, which I think is really a really well done thing that they presented throughout the entire movie. And you know, it's kind of a fun creative scenario that I hadn't really seen in a movie in a long, and really, I don't think ever, is the idea of like, you know, we've seen the movies where there's a person who's feeding the information to somebody who's dating somebody else and doing that behind the scenes. But this is the first time I think we've seen it like with letters, which is really, really funny because like letters today in 2020 are kind of like extinct. But it's just kind of funny how they kind of revive that kind of now ancient art form and then incorporate that into this new romantic piece that is romantic, but also about self-discovery, but is also non-traditional. It's not like heterosexual romance. It's like regular, you know, it presents a different perspective on sexuality than I think most of these coming of age movies would be representing. So it does a really good job with that too.
Yeah, I mean, besides the obvious LGBT connection that people see throughout this movie, there's a lot of stuff that Alice Wu wanted to tackle politically, religiously. Just the idea of immigration is tackled slightly in this movie. The idea of Aster Flores and Ellie Chu kind of having that immigrant connection. One of them is Latina, the other one is Asian. So there is that connection there. But personally, I love this movie because it balances obviously the seriousness of this coming of age story of self-discovery, but at the same time it has a lot of fun and funny moments, and you can watch this movie and be team Ellie Chu, and you can watch this movie and be team Paul Munsky, which I think is great. But it's one of those ideas of how high school feels like the stakes are so high for everything in your life, and Ellie Chu kind of realizing that she has so much more to live for, and this moment in her life is just a simple step to achieve what she wants to achieve. And that's what we get with her literature, with her writing the letters and discovering that connection between her and Aster. I'm gonna say right now, guys, I for one was team Ellie Chu all the way. I was like, Ellie Chu and Aster, let's go. Because the whole time I was like, this Paul guy, I know he's like this quirky, dumb, fun guy that is lovable. And I'm like, oh, I'm good.
Yeah, but he's so dumb. Like he's so dumb. And it's like, dog, like get a grip. Like
get a grip, dude. Like, come on. Like, I don't know. That's one thing that I don't know if you disagree with that, Sabrina.
I know I don't disagree with it, but I did enjoy that. Like he was dumb. There's kind of been this dynamic, and we've seen it in that show with the girl from Stranger Things. Well, actually, the two kids from Stranger Things, that Netflix series, where we kind of get this dynamic. Yeah, we get this dynamic of like a relationship between two friends, like a male and a female, and it's kind of that like dumb boy with that like really smart female protagonist. And so we've gotten that a few times. There's actually other examples too, and I really enjoyed it. I saw him as just like wholesome and kind of like oblivious, because like even though we say he's dumb, we don't dislike him, or at least I didn't dislike him. And I really did enjoy Alice Wu kind of taking the story that was personal to her. I always enjoy kind of seeing that, because we get this authentic approach to a story like this, and that's when it feels real. Even like the town, the setting she put it in, which is Squamish, just the way she built that town, the way she showed other members of the community in that town, and how Ellie Chu kind of like stood out, not only because of her race, but also because of her drive and ambition. It's kind of like she's in this small town, and some people are okay with, which is totally fine, obviously, just like living somewhere and growing up and staying there for the rest of their lives and kind of having that path set out for them. And she's always been off that path. She's always been a little bit different. She's never been fully like absorbed by the community, as we see from fellow students, which is something that is really cool, because we saw it in Lady Bird a little bit, with her, obviously her relationship with Sacramento, but also the opposite with the friend in Lady Bird, where she's just like, oh, you don't want to live in Sacramento forever. And we get a lot of that, but it's different, because Lady Bird, in something like Lady Bird, she didn't stand out like a sore thumb. She was that like alternative kind of like, oh, I'm angsty, but we don't get that from Ellie Chu. We get a genuine, she's an oddball, but she didn't choose to be this way. It's just kind of how they all react to her. And so I love that approach with Squamish as a whole, and with the community, and kind of how you know, we're rooting for Ellie Chu the whole time. I think it was really like wholesome and just like uplifting. I don't know.
Yeah, it's funny because as you say that, it's one of those quotes that I think Ellie says in one of the letters, where anyone who says they're different isn't really that different. But it's that idea of where their setting is, right? The idea of this town kind of being stuck in the same routine, and everyone does the same thing. Everyone looks the same. We have that scene with all the blonde girls looking the same, and her being friends with Flores. And it's that idea of how Ellie and Aster have this connection because they are kind of different, because they have this love of literature, and because they have different ideas and different thoughts of what life is, and philosophically things that teenagers probably don't think about that much when they're in high school. So that's why I love their relationship the most. And I was like, cut it, girl, cut this Paul guy off. But it's also the idea of her having a passion for literature and all this brainy stuff that she wants to talk about in books, but also a passion for art and actual artists and actual physical art, and her love of music, and the way she kind of self-discovers that, and how it's okay to play the guitar in a talent show. You don't have to play the piano. I love that aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Well, I also, like going back to that, they go out of their way to show you how smart she is in general. The fact that she like is getting paid to write everybody's papers, and then when she's having a bad week, everybody in the class like starts failing. I think that's really hilarious. And then I also think that you know, I also loved seeing her relationship with her father, who is you know, like you said, Chinese immigrant, and he's speaking Mandarin for a lot of the movie, but he's watching like American romance movies to familiarize himself with English. So that kind of gives her the literary perspective of like having like this really fantastical view of like romance, or kind of her in the beginning, she had like this illusionment to it. But like as she starts to write these letters and start to fall in love, like she starts to get what the whimsy is about. So I think that aspect of it is fascinating as well. My only criticism of this movie, my only genuine criticism, is that like they use a lot of narration, which fits the whole letter writing, reading kind of tone and aspect of it. Just for me personally, I thought there was like a lot. I felt like more movie was narration than actual dialogue. But you know, that's my only small critique I have about this movie.
Yeah, before we get to more critiques, obviously I want to get to standout moments that you guys have. So if you have any ideas of standout moments in the movie, keep them in your head. But one thing I want to say, and I have to say, and this is personal for me, when we first meet Aster, she's singing Annie's song by John Denver. And I told you guys when we talked about Okja that song is a trigger for me. Like it's an actual trigger. I will never not cry when I listen to that damn song. And sure enough, it's you, Sabrina. You told me to watch this movie. I pull up this movie. I pull up my bowl of cereal. And in that 5 minutes in the movie, she starts singing that. And I'm like, no, here come my tears. And I'm all crying and stuff while watching it. But that was something that stood out to me. Yeah, I want to give you guys a chance to give any shout outs to your favorite moments. It could be between Ellie and Aster. It could be some spicy moments when you went ooh. I for one love when Trig told Paul like when Ellie Chu get hot, and the way he like followed her to her house, and he was like, "I know what's going on, girl." I thought that was hysterical.
I personally really enjoyed. I really liked a lot of this movie. It's not perfect. It does have faults, as does like every film. But I think what it was trying to go for, especially with scenes when I was talking about Alice Wu's authenticity with this, the hot spring scene between Aster and Ellie, it really, not only is it like ooh,
yeah, that's what I said. I was like, oh.
Yeah, not only is it like ooh, but it's also really intimate in like a non-sensual way. It's like it's just between two people kind of talking about a lot of things. They're talking about life, they're talking about her mother. Even Aster saying something like, oh, Trig, you know, is gonna marry me. She's kind of brought, because that's the difference we have in the dynamic between Ellie and Aster, is that Aster's fully absorbed. Even though she is different, she is absorbed by the community 100%, and Ellie isn't. So she has this kind of different experience, even though they come from a similar type of situation. So them kind of being like, I don't know, kind of bare, like even bare, just like being in like the hot spring and things like that, and bearing themselves and bearing their souls and sharing their different experiences that they've had in the town, with Aster saying like, you know, Trig wants to marry me. Basically, it's almost the dream of anybody who's living in a town like that. It's like, oh, this is the guy, I'm gonna marry him, and I'm gonna live like a happy, successful like life, staying somewhere like this. And I think that's when it really dawned on me. It dawned on me all throughout, but that was the biggest one, the difference between Ellie and Aster with all their similarities. It also like even just like widened the gap of what they've kind of experienced in Squamish. So that's why I love that scene.
That's a great moment. RB3.
Yeah, I love that scene as well. Another moment that kind of stood out to me was the scene where, I mean, I don't know if this is like approaching spoiler territory, but there's a moment where Paul is at dinner with Aster, and then and we see Allie start to find a way to like interact with them with their date, like while she's like behind the scenes. I thought that scene was like really, really funny and kind of clever. I mean, it's a some movies have done that before, but I thought the way this movie did it was really funny and really unique. And then at that point in the story, you already had like enough built up stakes for that conversation or that whole interaction, that conversation to like really mean something. And I felt like that was a big turning point in the movie as well. So I really, really dug this movie a whole lot. I think it was really, really well done. And, the reviews for it, I think it has like a 96 or 97% Rotten Tomatoes, something like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it definitely, I think it has really good reviews, and I think is well deserved. I think this is probably so far this year. I think this is probably one of my favorite coming of age movies and one of the better movies I've seen so far this year. Yeah,
I want to get your closing thoughts as well, Sabrina. My closing thoughts are basically, I love the connection, and it's something that I feel like a lot of people are overlooking when talking about this movie. But the idea of the way you're brought up, not just in a community, not just in a family, but in a religion. People kind of overlook the religious aspects of immigrant families. A lot of them are super hyper Catholic. Like that's how a lot of Latinos are. That's how a lot of my family is. So it's this idea of like how you can't overlook that when your family kind of has this mindset of how you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act. And there's that religious aspect to it. It kind of does throw a wrench into the whole self-discovery LGBT connection that we have. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about enough, in my opinion, but it is there. And it's something that I appreciated that the movie brought up.
Yeah. And of course, I will always celebrate films like this, coming of age films that are kind of different out of the box. We saw it, as you said, RB3 last year with Booksmart, kind of having that Caitlin Dever in that film, and with Ellie Chu in this one. It's always something. I can't wait for the day when it's not celebrated anymore. It'll be even cooler when it's just like so normal that we get stories like this told from this kind of perspective, told from this kind of point of view. But it is really cool to kind of have that, because if I like for myself or for a lot of other people, if you kind of have something like this in high school, or when you're younger, it's a really cool way of approaching something like this in your life. When you see a reflection of your life or your experiences in film, it's always special. We always talk about all different kinds of representation. So I'm really, really happy that, first of all, that this film was made in general, just because coming of age stories, I feel like most of the time they're the most successful when they're extremely like formulaic. So with something like Edge of 17, with something like Booksmart, with something like this one, when it does go out of the box, and it's successful, it's amazing. It's a critical success. It's an audience success. It's on Netflix. It's available for streaming. It's going to hit a lot of households. So I definitely, like, closing thoughts, I definitely recommend anybody who's interested from this review to check it out, just because it is a really cool, sweet story, and it's charming, and it says a lot while still being so enjoyable and not hitting you over the head. Everything, all the points we talked about, it does not like hammer it over. It just tells a beautiful life story, and it shows relationships between family, friends, possible love interests. And so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it has a great entry point, right? Because there's not, it's that perfect balance between, I can almost kind of say that kids of all ages can watch this movie, right? Because I'm trying to think really hard of a scene that's kind of like R-rated, but there really isn't one. No. So it's very accessible. It's a very accessible movie for everyone to check out. And that is our recommendation. We say check it out. It's on Netflix right now, so you kind of have no excuse. But either way, guys, for the First Cut crew, review of the half of it, I'm Andres.
This is RB3.
I'm Sabrina.
You're peacing out. Peace out, guys.
No, you don't see her. Who she is. Who she could be.